What's up, guys? Ben here bringing you another video today. The New York SUBLINERS roster is fully officially announced. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the additions on the coaching staff. And I kind of have a lot of questions about this team, so let's dive in. After a season of much turmoil, New York SUBLINERS have made a number of changes in their roster heading into this season. Just as a refresher, KiSMET is no longer on the team. He's gone ahead and retired. It looks like Paul X is off to London, although they have not officially announced their roster just yet. So that's just leaving Hydra and KiSMET from last year's final roster, and then joining the team from the Florida Mutineers is Skyz, and from the Minnesota Rocker is Priestahh. Also joining the team, as you can see from this video, Troy Sender is leaving Optic Texas and joining this team as a member of their coaching staff. We also get this pretty meme clip of Preston here. I don't know who convinced Preston to do this dance, but I've already seen it punked on Twitter, so I tip it. Funny one from the New York SUBLINERS. All right, so let's talk about last year's team for a sec and kind of where I think they tried to address some concerns from their previous roster. This is their overall record last season. As you can see, they ended up as one of the better hardpoint teams, but S&D and Control were one of their weaker modes. And I should clarify as well, like if you get towards the end of the season, they actually played pretty good in Search at stage 4. Obviously they struggled at it in stage 3, but really they were good at Control in stage 3 and not particularly good at stage 4 when they did go ahead and make it to the grand finals. So okay, I think really kind of takeaway is, you know, they figured out their hardpoint form. They carried that to a really good run at the end of the season, qualified for champs, made it to the final tournament, made it decently deep. But the other game modes really weren't where they were excelling outside of a couple of maps. And so they want to make a team that's a little bit deeper and can maybe match up with your Optics or Thieves and Phases of the world. And I think my first impression of the roster is I think they might have kind of check that box, but I also think that just like previous New York teams, there are a lot of question marks about individual members of this roster. So let's dive in on those. Let's start off all the way on the right with Skyz. He's hitting over from Florida. He had a great season last year, a great season the year prior. My only question with Skyz, truly one question, is New York has gone through IGLs and in-game leaders and leaders of the team through an incredible rate the last few seasons. Like think of who they've had on their roster since the start of the CDL. They've had Accuracy, they've had KiSMET, they've had Clayster. I've just named 3 of, like, when you think of main AR, in-game leaders, like emotional centers of the team, like those are the guys you normally think of, and all 3 of them had their moment in the sun and then left the team. Skyz got some big shoes to fill, and also the shoes of people that haven't been there across multiple seasons consistently. Yes, I know Clay was there for 2 years, but we all know how that Clayster tenure turned out. The first season he was on New York, he was in the roster, and then at the end of the season he took a break and then he came back, and in the second season they benched him, and obviously we know about all the KiSMET stuff based on that episode of Flank from a few months ago. So Skyz got some big shoes to fill, and he's got some players who I think he's gonna have to work really hard with the coaching staff to get the best out of. And I think one of those players is Priestahh. I'm a big fan of Preston, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, for the sake of transparency, you know, I was working at FaZe Clan at the time we picked him up in World War II, and you know, Preston had a really good season in IW, but was like flung under the radar. We picked him up and he had like no team offers, which is wild to me, but I think because his ex-teammates were saying some stupid things behind the scenes, video for another day. Preston was amazing at World War II, he was amazing at Black Ops 4, used that to then get a spot on the Atlanta FaZe team, beginning of CDL, and he didn't play particularly bad on that team. I think he was sort of playing fifth fiddle, and then he joined Minnesota for 2 years, and it's been bumpy, you know? I think Preston's been really inconsistent at best, and it's kind of hard when you watch VOD and the mini-map. Like, it's almost like 50% of it is he's kind of getting set up by his team doing just irrelevant stuff on the map, especially in hardpoint, and the other 50%, I think, is him sometimes kind of like forcing plays and kind of taking himself out of really good spots. Preston's got really good movement, but I feel like at times, at least from when I watch him play, I feel like sometimes he takes himself out of situations where if he just kind of holds an L trigger, I think he'd be in a better spot. But I know where that ceiling is on Preston, and we haven't really seen it at all in the last 18 months. I think he's really going to be the X factor in this team. Like if Preston plays the way that he has played in Black Ops 4 and at times in Modern Warfare, this team's going to be really disgusting, and Preston's going to be a top sub player and give this team a real pace and dynamicism, and also a lot of playmaking in and around objectives. And on top of that, like I really like Preston S&D, especially with a team where they kind of all execute a system together. Again, the last couple of Minnesota teams he's on have been good at Search, but I think it's a lot of good individual plays in Search. Hopefully the squad can figure it out, because I really like Preston, but I think there's sort of a hedge on this roster. Preston doesn't play well, and we'll get to that in a minute. KiSMET, one of the 2 players returning from last year's lineup, had a great end of the season. I know you look at these stats and you say, oh, 0.89 overall KD, that's kind of meh, 0.94 S&D KD. I think if you watch, especially Major 4, like KiSMET was a lot of the reason why that team was able to qualify for champs. And I think his kind of solved a lot of issues that I feel like he had on his prior adventure in CDL with the Paris Legion. There were a lot of concerns on that team that he was playing really slow, playing for stats. I think watching him in challengers over the last couple of years and last year when he was on this New York lineup at the end of the season, like I think he's addressed a lot of those concerns. I think Kiz kind of got an opportunity to be a real mainstay in this New York team. He can kind of run a sub, run an AR. He's going to slot nicely as a flex player on this team behind Hydra and Priestahh. So Kiz is actually the player I think I have the least questions about. I'm pretty confident in Kiz playing well this season. I think some of my stuff is more on the other players. And then we get to Hydra. And this is a weird one because individually, talent-wise, he's coming to CDL and he's been amazing. Like instantly came in Cold War and looked like that guy. Unbelievably talented individual player, instinctual player, all game modes, just making plays. Like he is a generational talent in that sense. But what I think separates him in a negative fashion from, say, your Simp or your Shotzes is I feel like the other two guys have a better grasp at this point in their career on what they need to do to be a part of a consistent winning team. And maybe it's unfair to ask of Hydra because the New York situations that he's been a part of in Cold War and Vanguard have been full of a lot of drama, let's just be honest. So I think the areas that Hydra need to work on now that he's signed the new deal, he's the franchise guy, like it's cemented, Clay and Crim6 no longer on the team. I think now is about you are an individually talented player. How can you bring the best of your team and your teammates in order for this franchise to go from being a team that, you know, is up and down, the occasional event win, to being a real contender that's making every Sunday at tournaments and really up there with your Optic and phases. And I think a lot of that is going to be on the conduct of Hydra. And I think he's, you know, gone through the phase now where he's really learning English. It was obviously not a language that he knew off the bat, and he had to learn it, getting more comfortable with sort of the listening comprehension part and most of the speaking part. But now it's about being a better teammate. How do I conduct myself in a team setting to make sure we get better? And I think that's really important this year. As I've said in multiple videos, this is not a season where you have 3 months after game release before the first event. You are going to, at best, have a month of practice before you have to play some real competitive games going into the first major. And so if you waste any of those practice days, if there's behind the scenes stuff, you're just going to fall behind other teams. And you know what's going to happen this year? Teams that fall behind are going to make quick changes because they're going to hit the panic button after major one. So I'm expecting a lot from Hydra, both individually, but also for him to take the next step as a teammate. So there's another part to this roster we haven't talked about yet, and it hasn't been announced, but all I've heard is that this is going to be a done deal. Wardy will be joining this team from Challengers, obviously very heralded player from the Challengers world last season, be joining New York Subliners as a sub. My guess is the play here is, you know, get him settled in NA, get his visa stuff sorted, see if he can get on a good amateur team to start the season, and maybe even get to that pro-am, pro side of the bracket instead of playing through open bracket that event. And I think the play from New York management is look like if someone on this team struggles, as we've seen with New York, they have made a lot of changes over the last 3 years with their roster. They've got to be up there, I think, with some of the teams like London in terms of the number of changes. If any of these players are struggling and they want to make a change, well, they've got a really good player sitting on their bench who can come in and be an impact player. So I like the move from New York management, really kind of hedging against the downside of this roster. And I think my final question with this team is about Troy Sender. What a weird situation. In the sense of, you know, he was in that Optic camp, obviously on the Huntsman team as their head coach. Huntsman merged with Dallas Empire, became Optic Texas, and then Troy had to play second fiddle to Rambo Ray. And then it seems like over the offseason, I guess that the organization and Troy really couldn't come to terms on what his role was going to be, maybe some of that compensation sort of targets he was looking for. And so he ended up fielding other offers and ending up on this New York team. I'm trying to kind of understand exactly what Troy's role is. He's listed in his bio as CDL coach, so I don't know if he's the head coach of this team. I assume Diriel kind of maybe still is. Maybe it's sort of a prove it for both of them. I don't know. It's a little bit of a funky one. But I like what Troy could potentially bring to this team. You know, he's a very analytical guy, really good at running practice. From what I've heard behind the scenes too, like Troy's also very good at saying, okay, like here are issues. There are steps 1, 2, and 3 on how we get there. And look, you know, your criticism might say, well, like why didn't any of those Huntsman teams, you know, play good at the end of the season or whatever? And it's like some of that is very much on the players. You can have a great good game plan if you're a coach, but if the players aren't going to want to execute that or try, like there's not really anything you can do in that position. So again, I like the move from New York to bring in a coach. Obviously, Revan's gone, JP's gone, so they were missing some bodies there. Center is a very good pickup, but I think the question for me is him or Diriel the head coach? What's their relationship like? What's the chemistry? Who's doing what? Curious to see how it kind of gets sorted out when the season starts. So, okay, like where do I think this team falls? For me, I kind of put this team in the Toronto and Minnesota categories of squads. You're looking at somewhere between like top 4 to top 8. And I know you're going to say, well, that's a lot of teams, but you got to think like we're talking Minnesota, Toronto, New York. I guess you can argue Boston maybe is in that sort of same category if we're thinking of tier lists. Like it is a crowded midfield in the CDL. My only knock though with New York is I don't know if their floor to ceiling is as stable as I would give to Minnesota or Toronto. I feel like this New York team's floor is a lot lower potentially. I think their ceiling is just as high as those other teams I just named, but I have a lot more questions about New York than I do about the Toronto squad, even with them bringing in Standy and Scrappy coming in as a rookie. And especially the Minnesota squad, who's got a lot of proven winners on their team, chip on their shoulder and veterans. I feel like I have less questions about them than I do the other two squads. New York's a team I'm going to be putting a lot of focus on. I'm really curious if they can come out and be sort of a top 4 team at the beginning of the season. I won't be surprised if they get top 8 at the first major, but I don't think that's a bad result. I think this team is going to take a second to really gel and sort of figure out what their identity and who they're going to be. And I think the most important thing for New York, and I've said this in a couple of videos now, it's about stability and the behind the scenes stuff. The last couple of years have just been drama and incidents and people benching themselves and then people talking smack about each other on social media. Build a winning culture. Like that is the most important thing this year. If you don't win an event in New York, obviously that's a disappointment, but if the culture is a lot better, it's something to build on. I feel like that's a good victory for this team. Even if you're in the front office or a player, like they need to build something that's not the sort of shaky foundation where the roster is changing every 5 seconds and people are unhappy. They need to actually be aligned and executing a core goal. And even if they don't hit it this year, if you feel like you make progress towards a 2-year or 3-year goal, I think that'd be really key for this New York team. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm really curious what y'all think about this squad. I've seen sort of some of the talk on social media and Reddit. I think people are very 50-50 about the squad. So let me in the comments what y'all think. As always, smash that like button if you like this content. We'll be pumping out a lot more content in the coming days and weeks. The game's coming out very soon, so I'm super excited for that. Modern Warfare 2 coming up soon, and we're gonna have some great content. As always, guys, we'll see you on the next one.